Alright, ladies and gents, last time I spoke to you, I was going through how to write body paragraphs, and we went through the structure and all of the content that you need to include to write yourself an awesome body paragraph, like the one that you see on the screen before you now. Now, once you've planned or written all of your body paragraphs, then you are uh, in a position where you can start writing your introduction. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the different parts of an introduction and go through the sample that's been written on the document that you've been provided. Don't forget, you can go ahead and have a look at some of the information that's included at the top of the document about identifying some of the ideas you might like to talk about. But for today's discussion, we're just going to look at the introduction. So, first of all, what is an introduction? Well, what it needs to do is it needs to introduce all of the things that you're going to write about throughout the rest of your essay. That's why it's good to plan your body paragraphs first, so you know what sort of information you want to include in your introduction. The most important part of any introduction is your thesis. If you write yourself a really strong, really powerful, a well thought out thesis that answers the question directly, you'll write yourself an awesome essay. So let's have a look. First thing we start with is a general statement. Now, a lot of students mix this up with a topic sentence for a body paragraph. A general statement is exactly what it says. It's a generalized statement that doesn't really engage directly with the essay question or the topic as such. It has to gently introduce what you're going to be writing about. Our specific statement is going to introduce the specifics of the text, such as the title, the author, the date of publication, etc. It's probably the most boring sentence in your essay, but it's the easiest one to write. Then we're going to have a summary of the text or examples. I always prefer writing a summary of the examples, but it's not a bad idea to incorporate that as a brief summary of the plot. So as you're retelling the plot of the text, try and hit on the examples that you're going to use throughout your essay. And finally, the thesis, the guts of your argument. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this. But this really is your one sentence answer to the question. So if you want to think about an easy way to write your thesis statement, you might consider answering the question, what is it that I'm actually going to argue in my whole essay? And what your answer is should become your thesis. Let's have a quick look at the sample that we've provided for you. First of all, we know that a general statement has to be this light introduction to the topic, and the sample one we have here, or there's quite a few samples that we have here. The first one is, war zones are frightening places and nobody can escape the horrors of war. You can see in that example there is no link to the question. There is no reference to the wording of the question, and there's no mention of the text, the title, or any of the characters. The second one, human beings have an amazing capacity to commit cruel acts upon their fellow man, particularly during times of war. You might use something like that for the second question that you're answering if you took out the reference to the times of war. The third example, the experience of war stays with people forever, and often soldiers return as damaged men. Here we can sort of see the results of certain actions, so the results of the experiences of war, but again, we're not talking specifically about the text. And the last two are pretty much the same. The young and the innocent suffer the most during war. It's a short, sharp statement about the impacts of war, and normal life can end in an instant when war erupts. Again, you can see there's no mention of the text or the actual question itself. A nice general statement eases your audience or eases your marker into what you're about to write about. The next one, like I said, is probably the most boring sentence in all essays, but it's the easiest to write. You need to make sure that here you include all the boring information, such as the title of the text, the full name of the author, and the date of publication. And you'll want to try and smoothly integrate that into your paragraph. So don't just write this as a separate sentence on its own. You want to integrate it into your paragraph. The example we have here reads, the novel Crow Country by Kate Constable presents readers with the idea that Indigenous people have been treated unfairly in the past, and that this prejudice still exists in contemporary Australia. Crow Country tells the story of. So you can see how here we've got reference to the novel, the title, the author. I'd like it if it had the date of publication, and you can often include that in brackets, but then it weaves nicely into the sentence. Here you'll see that it actually mentions the idea. So for your specific statement, you don't just have to include the boring details. You can add some of the information that relates to your text now, because you're starting to answer the question. And this part of the sentence here, Crow Country tells the story of, we know that we're moving into plot summary. So we'll probably find that it might link nicely to writing the summary of the plot. Now, when you get to the plot summary, a lot of people do call it plot summary, but I think it's a good idea to focus on the examples that you're going to write about in your body paragraphs. So if you're going to summarize the events of the story, make sure that in that summary of the events, you're touching on, you're at least mentioning those events that you're going to write about in your body paragraphs. So here it says, following your specific statement, and this is the details of the text you're discussing, you would add a brief summary of the plot. Don't write too much, just a few sentences. You wouldn't write any more than 2 sentences usually. That's all you should need. We don't need to know what's happening in the text really. What we want to do is understand that you know the context of where your examples are placed within that text. Alright, here's the tricky one, the thesis statement. Like I said before, if you get this right, you're going to write yourself a really awesome essay. So what you need to do is capture exactly what you're going to argue throughout your response. And this should be powerful and should engage readers, and it should make them want to actually read your response. It should give them something to challenge the way they're sort of thinking, so that they go, wow, that's a really solid idea. Let's see how you're going to argue it in your body paragraphs. And the example that we have provided here is a little bit formulaic but very effective. The novel Crow Country has been constructed using narrative conventions to encourage readers to see that racial prejudice still exists in contemporary Australia, and to send the message that we need to respect Indigenous Australians and their cultural history. So it's quite a lengthy sentence. It has a lot of information in there, but it clearly demonstrates how this particular candidate is answering the question. We know that it's obviously from the novel Crow Country. We know that it's using narrative conventions. So when we talk about the how part of the question, this particular candidate's going to write about narrative conventions, and we can see that they're going to talk about racial prejudice and how it still exists. So we can see the link between the different parts of the question here. And they've gone on to add the reaction essentially by the audience and how they're positioned. That they are positioned to see that we must respect the Indigenous Australians and their cultural history. So a really effective thesis statement. What I suggest you do when you start writing your own thesis statements is to start with you substitute different parts of your own question into these sorts of statements, and then you tweak the wording so that it makes more sense. I certainly encourage you to write more than one thesis statement, because you won't get it right the first time. Keep writing, write about, I don't know, 4 or 5, half a dozen or so, and that way you can pick the best one that best matches your argument. And you want to make sure that it links to all of your body paragraphs. So write your thesis statement and say, does this match what I'm planning for my first body paragraph? Does it match my second body paragraph? Does it match my third body paragraph? And if it does, you know you've got yourself an effective thesis statement. I often tell students if they're stuck and they don't know how to write their thesis statement, um, you can just think along the lines. In this response, I will argue that, and whatever you write from that point on becomes your thesis statement. So we could try it here. In this essay, I will argue that the novel Crow Country has been constructed using the narrative conventions to encourage readers to see that racial prejudice still exists in contemporary Australia. You see how just giving you that starting point is enough to prompt the rest of your thesis. But I cannot stress enough, you cannot use personal language like I in your thesis statement or anywhere in your essay, so please don't include that anywhere in your response. I hope that's helped you in your writing and construction of your introduction. It's quite straightforward. The general statement's nice and easy. The specific statement's nice and easy. Writing your summary should be nice and easy, but spend some time on your thesis because you want to make sure you get that bit right. Alright, next time I'll make a quick tutorial on how to craft your conclusions.